Podcast at Ground Zero is presented to you by the Apocalypse. Because without the Apocalypse we wouldn't be doing this show.
Greetings, friends of the Apocalypse. This is Podcast at Ground Zero, your home for the Apocalypse, for episode 89, What's an Apocalypse? I am the Apocalypse Nerd, and he is Adam Baum Glancy. Welcome to the Wastelands.
Greetings, folks.
All right, folks, so what is an apocalypse? So today we are going to define the apocalypse to the best of our ability, because in the course of many shows, we've talked about this in little snippets here and there, like what is an apocalypse? What's a macro? What's a micro? What's a this? What's a that? What's the time frame? So we've kind of talked about it in different components, and we wanted to kind of have a more cohesive, just conversation about that. So, so that's what we're gonna talk about on today's show. And first, before we start, I wanted to, since we did the last show, we've enjoyed a couple of delicious cups of coffee on some of our viewers, and we just wanted to thank those folks who contributed to the collective and
Absolutely.
Get us a cup of coffee to help keep us going. Again, we do appreciate that. All that little bit helps keep us going. Another thing I'm not going to be doing anymore is, I know we refer to ourselves, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but a lot of times we refer to ourselves as, because we're gamers, as everybody knows, as grognards.
Yeah.
I'm not going to refer to us as grognards anymore, because I've seen too much lately about the type of people who self-identify as that, and they're not my kind of people.
We're not going to be able to reclaim the word grognard, is what I'm saying. It has been claimed by a very grumpy class of human that we're just not going to be able to wrestle that term back to respectability.
And I don't want to be associated with those type of people, so we're not going to be grognards anymore. We'll figure something else out.
We're OG gamers.
Yeah. Well,
original gamers.
Old and grumpy. Old grumpies.
Old grumpy gamers. Yes, that's what old G stands for. Yep, that's fair.
Oh, and speaking of gaming, I just, again, off topic. I'll just real quick. And by the way, we're gonna need to record a off topic probably in the next couple episodes, because I've been seeing a lot of cool stuff lately, especially movie wise. Because I've mentioned this website in the past. Quiet Earth is a blog website that I've been following for decades. I mean, I think it started in the very early 2000s. And they're always posting about generally post-apocalyptic and dystopian type movies. And they've been posting a lot of stuff lately. And there's a lot of stuff that's coming out that could be interesting. Like there's this one that's coming, I'll talk about it later, but there's even one coming out with Tom Hanks on Apple TV.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. So we're going to do an off-topic soon, and we're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that's coming out. But I want to say is, lately, I've been obsessing about Mothership, the RPG. Because they're putting so much stuff out, and I don't know. It's like, because it's for those of you who don't know, Mothership is it's a streamlined, simple, old school style role playing game set in space and horror. So I just been really drawn to it lately, because I love fantasy, love D&D, all that kind of stuff. Love the apocalypse, but my first love was science fiction. Star Trek in 1975 when it aired. Space 1999. Battlestar Galactica. UFO, Buck Rogers. Sci-fi was my thing. Star Wars. All that stuff. And this is science fiction in space. So it's like, you got your travel, but it's gritty and it's raw. Because I like horror. But I don't know. For some reason, it's like... I've played a lot of Call of Cthulhu stuff, but setting something that contemporary world, or like, no offense to Delta Green or anything, but just doing it in the real, like, not the real world, but in this kind of setting, just this day-to-day settings, just, I don't know, it doesn't appeal to me as much as horror in space. Just really, I don't know, it just clicks all the buttons for me,
Well, if you can suspend your disbelief that we've gotten out beyond the solar system, then why shouldn't the galaxy at large be filled with all kinds of horrible shit? And I would say that I was just listening to a thing about the movie Event Horizon, and about how the whole point of Event Horizon was to make a haunted house movie in space that would be less about a physical threat and more about the kind of threat you would get from a ghost story. And science fiction, and certainly this is one of the things that Lovecraft tried to do, was to try and take supernatural stories, but and horror stories that always had a supernatural bent, and then inject enough science into the stories to make them even more plausible. So maybe it's not a ghost or something. Maybe it's like a psychic impression or something that's rather than an actual spirit or something. It's just a reflection of things left behind. So science fiction meets horror always works because you can use the tools of science fiction to create the same horrors, zombies, the Frankenstein monster pieced together and brought back to life. You could do all the stuff with, you could get all the things in, like, I mean, we've had vampires in science fiction, right?
Yeah.
That weren't blood-drinking vampires, but had all the things of vampires. You can get all the classics into science fiction and use science fiction as your reason for why, you shouldn't have opened that tomb on that dead planet, and it doesn't have to necessarily be because, and it could be the result of, alien tech instead of the spirits or whatever.
Oh yeah. So it's like I said, so it's really drawn me because also, there's the Alien role-playing game that came out by Free League and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't know, I've just been really, getting jazzed up about science fiction horror. Cause again, science fiction was my first love before before fantasy, before sword and sorcery, before post-apocalypse. Science fiction was my thing, But yeah. So anyway, so it's
thank you for sending me that copy of that PDF.
Oh yeah, I want to play that game so bad. But anyway, so that was my completely off topic tirade. So defining the apocalypse. So. Oh God, we've had a couple of conversations about like what defines the apocalypse, because we even in the past have set some parameters like is it a full blown apocalypse? Is it a macro? Is it a micro? Because you could have situations where it's like the far remote island, the volcano blew up and destroyed civilization, and they have no contact with anybody else. To them, that's an apocalypse, but it was an apocalypse for you and me. So that's kind of like the micro, or macro type apocalypse.
The classic example you always pulled out was 28 Days Later.
Yeah,
28 Days Later, Deep Six is the British Isles, but the rest of the world is ticking along with their their quarantine of the islands. Trying to keep the infection from getting off, and that's kind of it's not micro if you're in London. It's not micro if you're in Leeds or Edinburgh or any of those places, but it's
there's got to be something. Well, you got micro. What's bigger? Macro. Macro is bigger than a micro, right?
Macro is bigger. Is mega apocalypse the biggest, where we trash the whole planet, or do we have to trash the solar system to get to mega?
I don't know. It's like because like the whole British, and they thought everything was done for until they started seeing jets fly over. It's like what. So, I mean, that's or like in Doomsday.
Yes, where we've just apocalypted Scotland.
Yeah.
How do you tell the difference?
People didn't like that movie. I liked it. I had a fun time with that. But again, those are micro or smaller. There's got to be a better term. Because they're not that small, but they're not world spanning.
Yeah, Peninsula
is
the Korean movie is another example where we've fucked up the Korean Peninsula but we have not overrun the planet. That's our apocalypse.
Yeah, so you can have an apocalypse, within still normal society, But, we tend to gravitate towards liking, it's like, guess what? The world's over. We like those kind of full-on apocalypses. So, we have that. But then also, another thing that we've talked about, and we're just going to bounce around here, folks, is, you have, your pre-apocalypse, kind of situations. Like in a lot of movies have it like before it all goes down. Then you have apocalyptic movies that take place during it going down. Like
like Greenland that just came out recently with what's his name? The Scottish actor who was in 300. I'm suddenly forgetting the actor's name, but we saw Greenland. There was another one that Forrest
Awake was during the everything falling down.
Yes, yes, you're
recent.
And the thing about the apocalypses that take place, this sort of it's going down right now scenarios, is those always strike me a little bit like a disaster movie.
Yes.
Like the Towering Inferno or the Poseidon Adventure. It's usually about people in a tiny corner of the apocalypse dealing with their particularly fucked up situation. They don't really get a grip on how bad things are until at some point somebody gets to a radio and finds out, oh yeah, FEMA's not coming. It's not just this town, it's not just this ship or whatever, it's everywhere.
Well, yeah. So is a disaster movie an apocalypse? Because
some apocalypse movies have the features of disaster movies.
And some of these disasters turn into apocalypses, but not necessarily vice versa. Just because you have a disaster doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the world. What's a disaster movie that doesn't...
Deep Impact. Deep Impact is a disaster movie, and there's sort of an apocalyptic event, but it's not a complete apocalypse, and you get this whole we will rebuild, and everything's going to be fine in, a decade or 5 years or something, Same thing with that movie San Andreas with Dwayne Johnson, right, where they're going to have the world's worst earthquake and California's going to fall into the sea. And literally the last line is like, we will rebuild or some shit. Not, we're perma-fucked.
Yeah, so a disaster movie isn't necessarily an apocalypse, but a lot of times a disaster could turn into an apocalypse,
Yeah.
Depending. But then also at the time, the people who are in it seems like an apocalypse to them because they don't know how extensive it is. So it's really hard to nail this down, because there's so many nuances to it, and one of the big things that we talk about also, again, we're going to continue to bounce around, folks, is the time frame. Okay, let's say we're having a full-on apocalypse. Okay, not even just a disaster, not a micro, not a macro. So it's a global event. Okay,
yeah.
Now
completely shutting down global trade and energy, regional governments, continental governments are going to fail. There's no way Moscow can tell what Vladivostok to do anything. There's no way that San Francisco's talking to Washington. It's all broken up into who can control 5 square blocks, who can scrounge food. It's that bad.
It's gone, McCready.
It's gone. Correct.
Can we fix it? It's gone, McCready. So
civilization's gone, McCready.
Can we fix it?
But yeah, it's that bad. Yeah, it's that level of bad. It's Mad Max everywhere.
So it's Mad Max. It's a global apocalypse. Everything's collapsed. So we're definitely in the apocalypse. Great. Now, so we're in a post-apocalypse. Because maybe it's whatever it happened, but how long does that apocalypse last? That's the question, because we have lots of good examples of settings that are considered post-apocalyptic, but it's like, it doesn't look post-apocalyptic. Like
is Shannara.
I was going to say Shannara. I read those first 3 books, okay, back in high school, and I'll never get that time back. But that I found out decades later, like, oh, that's a post-apocalyptic setting. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
I didn't see it either. I read the first book.
It was a fucking fantasy book. It was sword and sorcery. What apocalypse? So
it's like, Horse Clans is another one. Horse Clans is supposed to be post-apocalyptic, but I read it as fantasy. It just reads as fantasy.
The first book had a hint of it, Yeah. Hyboria, Samaria, the Conan, that's supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world.
You are right. That it is set in a magical post-apocalyptic world where there was a giant empire that ruled everything that suffered a magical version of doomsday. And this is what's left afterwards. So it's technically post-apocalyptic. Absolutely.
Elric.
Yes.
Is considered post-apocalyptic. But where do you draw the line? Because technically, because if I'm going to use an extreme example, the dinosaurs had a species-ending event, extinction event, level event, killed off all the major dinosaurs. It was apocalypse. We're living in that post-apocalyptic world, however, tens of millions of years later. So, are we living in a post-apocalyptic world, Scott?
As far as the T-Rexes are concerned, fucking A right, man. They're the ones going, get your paws off me, you damn dirty apes. For them, it's absolutely a post-apocalypse. And for the whatever survived the Cambrian extinction, that's another world-altering. That's one of the things I would say about an apocalypse. Apocalypses, when we think of, one of the things that we really think of as the classic apocalypse is the one that reorders everything. Now, it doesn't mean that civilization is completely extinct, but it does mean that whatever emerges from it has been dramatically altered. For an example, Mega City 1, of Judge Dredd. Sure, Mega City 1 kind of has, just around the edges, has kind of the trappings of sort of a super hyper America, but you'll see some stars, you'll see some red and white stripes, but this ain't America, baby. You know what I mean? It really ain't America anymore. It is Mega City 1.
Well, you got Mega City 1, Mega City 2, and you have Texas
City. They don't like being called Mega City 3.
Yeah. But then all between all those is the Cursed Earth, which is an apocalyptic landscape, which exists at the same time as high technology dystopia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like I said, it's hard to nail it down.
Just like Logan's Run. I was going to compare that to Logan's Run. Not just the movie, but also the books of Logan's Run were absolutely a high-tech dystopia existing in a post-apocalyptic landscape. And when Logan pulls the fucking plug on the computer that runs his dystopia, it's a second apocalypse. The Logan's World and I'm trying to remember the other book in the series are all set in the post-apocalyptic world where the dystopia has been wrecked by Logan. So, but I would say that, one of the things that jumps out about the idea of how long afterwards still continues to count as post-apocalyptic, I feel like that when we think of the classic post-apocalyptic genre films and art, there has to be some connection to the world that's gone.
There's a connection. There's still a connection to the past.
Yeah,
and it's still a memory. But it's still within recent memory.
Well, it doesn't even have to be that recent. We had a couple thousand years of time that went by in what is it with the road builders?
Eternity Road.
Yeah, Eternity Road is thousands of years, but they know there's a civilization the same way we know there are Egyptians, the same way we know that there are Romans or Sumerians and Babylonians thousands of years later. But
that's a very good comparison because it's a past civilization. So, but is it still considered post-apocalyptic? Because it's like, are we living in an Egyptian post-apocalyptic world?
Well, it's funny.
Roman post-apocalyptic, you know, I mean, it's like, no, we're not.
Yeah, it's funny you should get into that because there is a thing that is referred to as the Bronze Age apocalypse, or the Bronze Age crisis, where Egypt, Assyria, Mycenae, and Greece fucking crashed and burned in like 50 years. In 50 years, every major city in the Western Mediterranean was burned and looted in an attempt to get food because it appears that there was some sort of crash for the food supply. And as one place had no food, everyone stormed into the next civilization. Nobody sat still to die and starve in place. Everyone packed their shit and went where there were supplies and took them and wrecked the place in the process. And in 50 years, in the lifetime of one human being, they went from trade across the Western Mediterranean, you know, to create Bronze Age artifacts because you got to get the tin from one place and you got to get the copper from another place. And suddenly they went down to Egypt's barely hanging on by a thread is greatly diminished. Mycenae in Greece is gone. The Hittite civilization is wrecked, and a new civilization of Assyria has risen up to take over some of it. But it's FUBAR, and for them, yeah, it technically, yes, that's a post-apocalyptic. This idea that there have been multiple apocalypses that we as humans keep surviving.
Oh, we're living. You know, people in Central America are living in a Mayan post-apocalyptic world, right? I mean,
yeah, and they may be. Not to mention the alien invasion of Europeans that happened right after Mayan civilization crashed and burned, because the Spanish didn't really, come crashing in on the Mayans the way they did on the Aztecs. The Mayans were already abandoning their cities and abandoning those big temple complexes by the time the Spanish showed up, because they were already in decline. And I'm not, 100% sure why. There's a lot of thought that it might have been, they may have gotten a dose of plague. Certainly there was enough of it about in the Caribbean at the time with the new world diseases coming, or it could have been something else. But these apocalypses keep happening, and human beings keep surviving in some fashion after another. Whether it's the, something like the Little Ice Age that took place. I want to say the Little Ice Age is like the 1600s or something, where we had a change in the environment that lowered the temperatures globally. We do keep surviving these things, and that was one of the things that happens in the Saberhagen novel that I picked up.
Yeah.
I'm suddenly forgetting the title of it. There's I'll pull it up on my Kindle. I think that's where I picked it up. But that Saberhagen novel is such that the world that you and I know, the 1980s, the 1970s, this late 21st century world, is so far in the past. They've had so many civilizations rise and fall. That one, there's no artifacts from that. None. And instead, the past civilizations that that have risen and fallen, and their characters living as tribal people living in jungles, they're running across the ruins of the civilizations that moved the earth so it wouldn't get eaten when the sun became a red giant. That civilization rose and fell. So it was an interesting take on the post-apocalyptic, in that, Dark as the Sun. Finally looked it up. It wasn't Saberhagen. It was Philip Jose Farmer. I got that wrong.
Oh, Jose Farmer, that's right. Well, see, yeah, Saberhagen is a whole other set of novels where they were looking for this tank to win this war or something like that. But
yeah, I think Saberhagen's the guy who did the Berserker series.
Yeah, so having all these conversations, where do you draw the line? Or do you draw the line? Because technically everything is a apocalypse. Well, because then, what's the apocalypse? Is it just is it considered an apocalypse? Do we only consider it an apocalypse unless it's a global spanning collapse of every civilization and the world has to start over. Is that because having these smaller isolated ones aren't really it's like the Bronze Age thing's collapsing, but there are other areas are still going on. So
this didn't bother the Chinese at all. Yeah. When civilization burned up, or the didn't bother the guys living on the Indus River at all. When Mycenaean Greece fell over and went boom, not at all.
Yeah, because these are localized. These are isolated. These are again macro, larger apocalypse, but not global, world spanning.
Part of the difference is that civilization on Earth has gotten to the point where it's so completely intertwined, and that's an effect of an effect of the post World War II world. Yeah. Is that World War II, post World War II, created a world where everything is integrated and everything is connected, and there's global markets. It started in World War I because of all the material used to fight that war in Europe, but World War II is the one where they're fighting all over the Pacific Ocean, all over the Atlantic Ocean, all over Europe, all over Asia. It really does cover a lot more square footage, and at the end of it, you've got a world where, America is paying attention to the comings and goings in Tibet. Like, we have decided we need to know how things are going in Nepal for America's national security, in in the atomic age, and I think that there was a time when civilizations would have huge areas between them that would just be filled with barbarians, their own cursed earths, that they're, between China and the Roman Empire is a big swath of hairy guys on horseback who'll kick the shit out of you and take your stuff,
But everything is so interconnected now that if the dominoes start falling, it's going to fall.
Certainly, that's the way we envision an apocalypse now. Yeah. Is that it's global because we live in a globally connected markets, globally connected technologies, economies,
communications, everything.
So, for when we worry about an apocalypse, the idea is not that there's no help coming from anywhere,
because Joe Blow on the other side of the world on a different continent is going through the same shit I'm going through. Yeah. He can't help me. I can't help him.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly. That's what we, again, you're right. In modern terms is how we kind of think of the apocalypse, because again, but then also, like I said, time frames are important to me too. Like, like I said, Moorcock or other things, like when you're like thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
The Jewel in the Skull series, all those were post-apocalyptic, but it's so far in the future you get to have a fantasy world.
Yeah, the event that happened is not in any kind of living memory or books, or it's so far removed where it's just like, yeah, we think there was this thing. The world has changed so much. Is it real still an apocalypse? Because what was that one thing I posted on? Was it the Gam World Forum? Like somebody was talking about, a scenario, setting up a campaign scenario where, people come back to Earth after, the apocalypse.
Oh yeah. A returning ship like the Warden or something comes back to Earth.
Yeah, and I posted. There was a series of books by John Dalmas. It was called the series was the Yingling. It was called because it was centered more in Scandinavia. And the Yingling was like this coming hero warrior type person. But the books were considered, the first two books more so than the other ones, they got a little goofy. I didn't read the last three of this series, but because the first one came out, the Yingling came out in 1971, and then Homecoming came out in 83, 84, I think. Big span, and it's like, the story is like the Yingling was set in a post-apocalyptic world, like not like millions of years, but it was probably a couple of hundred. But there was, from what I remember from reading the book, I read this in the 80s or 90s. I think I read in the early 90s. There were some remnants of a post-apocalyptic world there. And then in the second book, Homecoming, there's a returning colony ship that comes back to Earth. that lands on Earth. Like they came back after like it was like 200 or 300 years, and they're like, "Hey guys, oh wait, what happened?" Because basically it's a medieval. The world has reset to a medieval style world. That level of technology. And all the shenanigans ensue with primitive horsemen and guys with ray guns and spaceships. Kind of scenario. But again, I would still consider, even though society has kind of moved on to, again, a medieval level of technology and understanding, but it's still not that far. It's a few hundred years. They still have some memory, and, spaceships are landing, from before time. I would still consider that a post-apocalyptic kind of setting still. But when we start getting to these ones that are thousands and thousands of years, I'm like, me personally, I'm like, okay, you got to draw the line somewhere.
Well, certainly, I feel like post-apocalyptic genre should have, as part of the story, a connection to the world that was lost. So when we're reading Starman's Son, it's all about his trip into the ruins to scavenge for lost technology like pencils, which and paper and things like that he goes on his mission for. Even something set, I don't know how many millions of years in the future that Wizards was set, the connection to the world before is where the mutants dig up the old Nazi propaganda films and discover this ideology that is connected to our world, and they apply it to their
that movie was
world.
a special scenario because it's like tens of thousands of years, that stuff wouldn't be...
Well, of course not.
Wouldn't be viable anymore. But that scenario where the past is still retrievable.
Yeah.
Is like Starman's Son, Hyro's Journey, Eternity Road. Those scenarios where the past is still present and obtainable again. Be able to retrieve it. Yes, I say that. But when you're like 10 million years in the future and there's maybe look, the mystic penny from the world of the Wizards before, that one little bit tie-in is not enough to be a post-apocalyptic to me.
I agree that you need something better than that for the real post-apocalyptic feel. And one of the things about the post-apocalyptic sort of setting is it is about a reset. So you can, and I feel like it's important in the genre to have callbacks to the world that's lost in sort of its commentary. You can have a post-apocalyptic stuff like The Survivalist, right? The Survivalist is just doing the Cold War after the apocalypse. It's just more Cold War.
And
right?
but the thing is, it's still fresh. It's still kind of happening. Like everything's collapsed, but it's still going on. That's post-apocalyptic. That's so close that it's almost kind of it's post, but it's not quick because it's still like, okay, everything collapsed, but shit's still shifting. So it's you're still in that world. Things aren't lost and buried. Things are just still laying in front of you. Yeah.
But what I'm thinking here is that let's see if I can come up with examples of this.
Definitely 100 years.
I was going to say things like, okay, in things like Fallout, there are callbacks, despite the fact it's 100 to 200 years after their apocalypse. There are still callbacks to things that remind us of our current world, like the New California Republic is supposed to have elements that remind us of sort of modern civilization with all its flaws, right? Whereas the
New Vegas?
No, I was going to try and remember one of the other faction names. Whereas, the guy who creates the Legion does so because he found Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire and thinks, oh, this is a great way to reorder society. I should use this as a model for rebuilding civilization, right? That's where the Legion comes from in New Vegas. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Steel, cribs from, knights and monastic orders like the Templars or the Knights Hospitaller or whatever. So one of the aspects of certain, post-apocalypse stories is to reach into things that are our past and pull stuff out and reorder them. You've hit the reset button with whatever your apocalypse is, plague, meteor strike, whatever, and now you've got this toolbox, which is human civilization up to this point. You can reach into and come up with all kinds of new stuff for it. You can mix and match into stuff.
Because it's still there, you could still retrieve it. It's still obtainable. Whereas again, in other scenarios, it's so far gone that you can't do that because you've already done what you're talking about, and now things are reordered and progressed so far down the road that those past items are gone at this point, and now you have new artifacts in this new world that's been created because it's so far down the road. In what the fuck? What's the book that I hated and everybody loves? A Cantel for Leibowitz.
Canticle. I was just about to say Canticle. All right.
Like that one, it's like it starts off supposedly post-apocalyptic, but it didn't feel that. But it basically reboots. Like it starts a little bit. It seems like it's supposed to be post-apocalyptic, but it's kind of going through the reset. But there really isn't much of an apocalypse, and then it gets to the point where it's like modern day again, and it's just a new world, a new civilization.
And then suddenly it's near future before you can say Jack Robinson. The story's moved on to a near future, and that is an interesting point about post-apocalyptic setting. When you say time frame is how long does the post-apocalypse last? How long does it look like Mad Max? Mad Max, Road Warrior. Everyone's alive. There are lots of people who are alive who can remember what it was like before it got blown up. It's the same thing with what was it? The Postman. That character in the novel was like a freshman or a sophomore in college when it started to fall apart. But then you go and you take something like, I don't know, the characters from, what was it called? Reign of Fire. They all were children when the apocalypse came, but they still remember stuff. They still have a connection to the past. You get into things like, Gamma World, Eternity Road, or let's see, Logan's Run. No connection to the past. They stumble out. Now they get one because they stumble out of the dystopia, and then there's like, holy shit, there's a Washington Monument and a reflecting pool. But I was also going to say, Waterworld. Waterworld is there's no connection to the past in Waterworld necessarily. I mean, there is, and there's the tanker, the Valdez, and they've turned the skipper of the Exxon Valdez into a saint. So I shouldn't say there's no connection to the world, but I do like. So Waterworld's not a great example, but I was trying to come up with something where.
Did you ever read the? Did you ever read the Pelbar Cycle?
No, tell me about that.
Pelbar Cycle. It's 7 novels. The author's name's escaping me for the moment, but it's called the Pelbar Cycle. It's 7 books. It's set in it's like they're not huge. They're like maybe 200 something pages a book. They're not big, but that's supposedly post-apocalyptic. But it's more of a medieval world. It's basically, civilization has come back to medieval. There's castles and armies and stuff like that. And there was very little left of the apocalypse. There's the very little previous connection to the world. In one book, they do. In one book, they're going through these empty plains. And somehow they hit a spot where they collapse into the ground and they go underground. And what's underground is they fell into an old building, a one-story building. So enough time has passed that a one-story building has been covered by fucking dirt. So it's a bit in the future. I don't remember. I think it was like 800 years or something like that.
It's Paul O. Williams. I just looked it up. And I feel like if you're going to have it be a post-apocalyptic story, there has to be a stronger connection to the past.
There wasn't. That's what bothered me about it. It's like there was the one scene where they collapse into this old school. It's an old schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. And basically, they did a good job of describing the ancient technology. Like they were describing a pencil sharpener, and I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? It took me a minute to realize what they were talking about.
It's that classic thing that they wanted you to do in Gamma World, where you could describe an object in a way that would befuddle your players that you're talking about a rotary phone. You know?
So the story at one point has that little connection, but that's about it. There's really not a whole lot to where I'm like, yeah, I guess it is technically in a post-apocalyptic world. It's like 800 years later. But there's no mutants. It's just basically it's like medieval it's medieval sword fighting. That's all there really is to it.
Not even any sorcery disguised as Thai technology or.
Nope. They discover technology. They rediscover black powder, and that's like the big thing. And they're gonna conquer these people on the one so and so river because their fortress controls a river, and they're gonna get gunpowder and make cannons and take them. Very little apocalypse. So that whole series is post-apocalyptic, but it's like. But not really, because they're like you were saying that that connection to the past is barely there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the big thing that needs to sort of be in that's the best kind of post-apocalyptic literature or art is the connection to the past. And one of the reasons I think it's super important is because a lot of times what's happening with post-apocalyptic art is commentary on the present. I mean, yes. They're using the apocalypse as a lens to comment on any number of...
It all is and always has been.
Yeah. And so, maybe it's too easy to have that direct connection, but I like it. I want to be able to have that connection to the past.
You need it because then it feels post-apocalyptic. Again, these novels that take place so far in advance, so far that don't have that connection, I don't feel it. Like Starman's Son, you got that connection. No Night Without Stars, where they find the crazy fucking cybernetic installation. That's fucking great. That's got that connection. It's like, yeah, that's post-apocalyptic. Like, it's not too far that it's still there. Or the one book series I told you about. Oh God, what's the name of the book? It was, I can't remember, again, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there was a short story. It was Age of something. I can't remember. But it's a story where, the ruined city, it's a medieval society, but the ruined cities, are still there, and they're taboo. Like, people aren't supposed to go there, but people do because, people get sick because, radiation. And in this story, one of the main characters stumbles upon this area that was part of a museum or a welcome center or something, and there's a holographic AI that when it goes into the area appears because there was like some solar cells that were still keeping its battery charged.
Sounds like they use that sounds like they kind of use that in the recent remake of The Time Machine. Remember the AI guide in the museum in the Time Machine?
Vaguely.
It's one of my favorite tropes where he goes into a little more futuristic than we are now, and there's this AI that can project a hologram that will guide you through the museum or whatever, and he shows back up 500 years after that, when that museum is ruined, and finds the guttering, stuttering AI
that still remembers
being like, "Yeah, do I remember you? Yeah, I just talked to you. Well, 3 days ago in my timeline." But
they took that because that book I'm talking about came out like 40 years ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. So. But yeah, they do that, and it was interesting because they talked to them because it had its own level of intelligence. Limited, and it remembered, and it was dying because its batteries were. Because the batteries still held up for a little while because of the solar, but once it was being used a lot, like what was left of the batteries, like it wouldn't charge it. But so they talked to I wish I could remember the name of this. Remember the story, but that was a story that I like because it was like. It was a medieval. There were still the connections to the past, the cities, the AI. See, that to me was a good post-apocalyptic story. Like, Eternity Road, good post-apocalyptic story. They run into the crazy AI in the subway. and they find all these other places. That I like that kind of post-apocalyptic connection because it's far enough in the future to where there's nobody alive that remembers the past. It's not like, the Postman or Mad Max where there's people who were alive remembered, or or like, oh, Grandpa kind of remembers that, and like some of these other stories I've read.
Yeah.
No, but there is nobody has any living memory of the past, but the past is still there for them to discover and figure out. That's the kind of I like that kind of apocalypse.
Agreed. Certainly, it's my favorite type because again, it's I agree. It's not necessarily realistic that you're going to come by 200 years later and dig up, your 5.56 rifle out of the dirt and get it working, like you do in Fallout, like you do in Gamma World, But the idea that the tools of the past exist and that you can use them in some manner to advance, rebuild civilization, take the pressure off of whatever world you live in, that there are, if not secret knowledge from the past, maybe even lessons from the past that the characters can apply and use. That's always,
that's what happens.
Always works for me.
And that's what happens in that story that I was talking about. It's called Vault of Ages by Paul Anderson. Paul Anderson, Vault of Ages, because exactly they were breaking into the vaults, the ancient vaults in the taboo cities, to get the technology to defeat their enemy. So that's perfect example of what you're just talking about.
Yeah.
So,
there's definitely that level of apocalypse. The other sort of like, with it's in memory, where the apocalypse, the before time is within everyone's memory, always seem to sort of, some of the best ones, in my opinion, are the ones that rely on the idea that we lived in a very specialized society where we're able to have an economic life that doesn't involve farming potatoes and giving half the crop to our local lord so that he can then use it to buy enough chainmail to keep the thugs around him armored enough to keep the bandits out of your backyard and steal.
So that you could grow the potatoes to give me the potatoes to, and the cycle, the circle of life,
So we live in a much more intricately specialized world where a world of engineering and installation and customer service and even people, paid to create entertainment, for Christ's sakes, and they're not just bards, or whatever. But the deal is that some of the best post-apocalypse is stuff where when this complicated world collapses and you realize that your job was an accounts executive at an insurance company and you worked the math for actuarial tables or something, or you were somebody who bought and sold stocks for a hedge fund, where suddenly your skill set is useless and you've got to figure out how to clean a gutter, plant a crop, cut a piece of wood straight, and at some point you realize, oh God, not only do we need to learn how to, be carpenters, we need to learn how to make carpentry tools because the ones that exist are going to run out. And we've got to have this. We got to get back to a sustainable Middle Ages technology, or we're all in a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah, because the modern ones aren't going to work. You need to go to a library and find a book about these tools to make the tools to make the other tools to make the tools. It's like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Some of the best post-apocalypse that deals with people dealing with it right afterwards are the ones where you realize how complicated life was. And how you have to, the things you're going to have to do to get down to a level of sustainable life when you don't have a population of tens of thousands where people can specialize in niches, and everyone supports each other. You've got a community of 100. And you've got to keep you got to have medicine, food, defense, all of that happening with just a tiny group of people.
Wasn't that starting? Wasn't something like that starting to develop, I think, in Last Babylon? Like, they were realizing, like, oh, yeah, we need to do this,
Yes.
and we need to organize. Like, I think that was forming in Last Babylon. Like, they were realizing that shit. We need food. We need to be able to have wood, and we need to be able to have this. We don't have that. We just can't go to the store and buy it anymore. So I think you saw that happening in The Last Babylon.
There's a very small post-apocalyptic movie called After the World Ended. Does that ring any bells for you?
It sounds familiar.
The thing that most stood out for it is that one of the actors in it was one of the hosts of Mythbusters. And it's not Jamie, it's the other guy whose name I'm not remembering. But let me see if I can pull this up here. And one of the things they taught, one of the things
it's the guy who's a little more outgoing.
Yes, Jamie's definitely the tech introvert compared to the other fella. But yeah, one of the things that's sort of in that movie is this thing where they're having to sort of reinvent things like community justice. They're having to reinvent, the social organizations after the end. And at one point, he's looking at, their access to weaponry. And there's a lot of bullets laying around after the apocalypse, but they're going to run out. And we don't have the technological ability to form new casings. So we're never, we can reload for a while, but eventually those old casings will be too damaged to work reliably or at all. And what we really need to be working towards is black powder cap and ball weapons.
Oh yeah, because the modern gunpowder to do the reloads is going to run out, and then you're left with, if you discover how to make black powder, that's not enough to. I think we've just talked about this before, to really fire, weapon
a lot of modern weapons require the modern smokeless nitro based powder, and black powder will jam them up good. And black powder is less powerful than the smokeless powder, so
you're not going to get the blowback. You're going to have to, you might be able to get it to fire, but then you may have to manually clear it to. Even with something that's on, semi-automatic, you're going to have to manually do it. Maybe if you're lucky.
But even then, as he's going, we need to be figuring out. We need to be adapting to a cap and ball sort of technology for firearms. But even then, do we really have the technology to mill
barrels,
replacement parts for a cap and ball weapon? And sort of understanding the fact that you don't know how to weave cloth, and there's only so long you can scrounge for stuff in the shopping centers or whatever that you hope will exist that haven't burned down in the meantime.
I remember the scene from Night of the Comet when they're in the store and they're trying on clothes and and they're like, attention KOR shoppers,
Well, that's great when you're in your first 3 or 4, your first week after the apocalypse. The problem is when it's 6 years later. And again, the classic bit from the TV series Jeremiah, where they discover that the people that are up against the mysterious assassin,
they got spare underwear?
Yeah, he has clean underwear, much less underwear. It's also clean, and it was just one of these moments where they're like, I haven't seen underwear in like, I don't know, 10 years. And I'm like, that's the kind of thing where, the people who are living with the recent memory of the world that was realize that they don't know enough to recreate the world where it left off. They're going to have to recreate, at best, the world a century ago. They're not going to be able to come up with cell phones and iPads. They're going to, at best, be able to, if we can make a telegraph work, we're going to consider ourselves goddamn lucky.
And there are people out there who live in these, 1800s type thing where they could do these things, but there are so few of those and far between, and who knows if they will survive whatever global event, so you can't rely on that. You got to rely on, I don't know shit, and I don't know if I'm going to figure it out.
it's really I better hope there are books. I better hope there are books so I can learn how to do the thing, so I can do the thing, so I can do the thing. Because, oh my God, just to make a pair of pliers, holy crap, the things you need to know to make a pair of pliers, just something that pinches. That's just that fulcrum and lever. Oh boy, the best I can do is wave a stick at it. I think that I could wave a stick at it and maybe throw a rock. That would be it. That's about my level of technical expertise.
Oh yeah, like I know how an internal combustion engine works and all the parts, and I know everything that needs to go in it to make it work. I couldn't fucking make one to make an engine to power a cart to go around. It's like I know
scratch.
I know all the part. I know enough to know. I know all the parts. And I know what all the parts do and where they need to go and how they need to do it, but you got to make one. I'm going to drag my stuff around in a box. It's like,
I can maybe figure out how to make an axle so I can make a cart. I can do a cart.
I can make a wheelbarrow. That's about it, Or like we've discussed in the past, transportation where, third world car, a lot of times people just have a bicycle and they pile things on a bicycle because there'll be plenty of bicycles around with wheels that don't work, but it's got wheels and it's got a platform that you can put stuff on and push it,
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember if it was an old Twilight 2000 module or whatever, but they had this thing where you encounter some refugees who are using side-by-side bicycles with sort of pipes that have been screwed together with brackets from that would normally hold plumbing pipe together, now holding the pipe to the frame of the bike to create a rack where they've stacked all of their refugee stuff. So at least they have these wheels and the mechanical advantage to push all their stuff around, and I thought, yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. But yeah, the complicated nature of our civilization is one of the factors that really strikes me about a post-apocalypse story. One of the best ones was the British TV series Survivors.
Yes. And
Survivors really let us know, holy shit.
We're in trouble.
Yeah, there's too much to know. You cannot get back to the way it was. You can't.
Not anytime soon. Maybe in a few hundred years.
Yeah, as long as you keep, not failing. You get some nice steady progress and everyone gets their calories, yeah, maybe you can get back to something like that in 100 years. But the good news is, in the post-apocalypse, as opposed to like going from the Middle Ages to the Industrial Age, is the hard work's already been done, and it's all in books, right? So we don't have to discover shit from scratch in the apocalypse.
Hopefully.
If we can, that guy who's defending the library, with his last round, that's the guy you look out for, because holy shit, all those boring technical manuals in there, that's what you need to get your hands on,
Yeah. Hopefully one of the people who are going to, like Matthias, going to burn the books. So, which could happen.
Fucking brother Matthias. Yeah. That asshole.
But... So I think all we've really, we're going to wrap this up here, folks, because our time is up. Yeah. I don't think we've really answered the question that we posed in the first place.
I think we have. I will. You state your thesis, and I'll state mine.
Oh, I got to come up with a thesis. What is this, school?
Well, you're suggesting that we haven't defined the post-apocalypse.
Well, I mean, not completely. We've defined many apocalypses and many types of apocalypses.
But I think it's that connection to the past. I think it's really not post-apocalyptic literature or art unless there is a connection to the before times. That
as a
post-apocalyptic,
yes, not pre, not during collapse, not disaster, but post-apocalypse. But it has to have the connection. You're right. So, in our opinion, yes, we did establish. We both agreed that you're right, that the connection to the past is vital, but it's got to be a good connection, not 1,000 years in the future. And look, Mama, not finding the doll that doesn't mean anything because there's nothing else around. There's got to be a strong. I think there's got to be a strong connection, or at least to that past, not so vaguely shrouded in mist and mystery. There was like, oh, the ancient ones who did this, and we don't know or see or have anything from them, but we know they existed. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I need that connection, and I need it to there to be sort of a. It doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely that the past is going to be the thing that helps save the present. That's not necessarily a thing, but the idea that there was a world before and the world before has some effect on the present.
And it helps define the present also.
Yes, that's exactly right. It helps define the past, defines the post-apocalyptic present. Yeah. I will say that we've at least come to that conclusion on tonight's episode.
Yes. So, folks, that is our take on, what is an apocalypse. We didn't even mention anything like the Silo series, which has got some good fodder for that. Especially since, did you ever read the little side story that he wrote about the other group of people? Did you ever read that one?
No, I have not. Is it just a short story?
It's a short story that he put out, and he put out in a collection of various short stories that talks about a group that was somewhere else, and then they try to go to where that is. It kind of wraps up because it eventually wants to take place after the events of the Silo series, and kind of wraps it up a little bit. It's good. I can't remember the name, but it's a collection of stories. Track that down. It's good. So,
will do.
So we didn't even touch on that one. That would have been a good one we could have talked about too. But folks, all right. So that's going to be it for this week, folks. We hope you were entertained by our banter, and hopefully it helped you define the apocalypse for yourself. Because again, other people are going to have different takes on it. But this is just based upon our hundreds and hundreds of post-apocalyptic stories and movies that we have seen and read over our time on this planet. So hopefully that'll...
Far too many.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll help you as well. But, so we're going to wrap it up tonight, folks. And as always, we're going to, our next show that we're going to do, we're going to review Black Summer Season 2. And then after that, because I talked about it, we're going to do an off-topic because there's a bunch of little different things out there that we could talk about. So we're going to do that as well. But we're going to do Black Summer first while it's still fresh in our minds. It's barely fresh in my mind anymore. But we're going to talk about it, a little bit because we enjoy that series. So, and as always, again, thank you for being with us. Thank you for people who have given that little bit of support. We appreciate that. As always, be socially responsible. If you want to follow the blog, whatever. I'm not going to repeat this like I always do. So that's it, folks. If you've listened to any of these shows, you've heard me talk about these things 100 times. So just 88 times. So
you know what to do. Exactly 88 times you've heard us tell you be socially, medially responsible.
Be responsible, if you like it, follow it, share it, tell your friends, whatever you need to do. So, like I said, we do this because we enjoy talking about the subject matter. So, all right, folks. So that's going to be it. Again, look forward to the next show coming out soon. I'm the Apocalypse Nerd. He's Adam Baum-Glancy. Thank you and good night.
If you enjoy the content we produce, please consider supporting us with a cup of coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/PCAGZ for more details. Keep up to date with us by visiting podcast@groundzero.com and subscribe to the blog via email.